Hey guys, my name is Loveless and we are back with Quirk Knife. So story's gonna get juicy. I don't even think we're at a climax, but we're getting there. We're getting there. Okay, so let's get straight into it. Mitsuki wouldn't say that she was anxious about her son, but she was more intrigued and confused. Katsuki has been so hateful towards the idea of therapy. After the first session, he threw a temper tantrum like a toddler for the love of Cammy. Mitsuki nearly gave up. She couldn't force her kid to do something that he's so adamant about not doing. Yet, Katsuki got back into the car the following week for his session, and the next week, and the week after that. Mitsuki really couldn't tell if her son was getting better or worse. But his therapist, a lovely woman named Suki, she said to expect this, to expect strange changes, but it was still scary for a mother not to completely understand what's going on with her child. Katsuki drawn back from his friends. He never really went to the arcade anymore, and he was always home right after school. At the same time, he's been lashing out more at home, shouting and screaming, and now there's no more violence. Before therapy, Katsuki's form of lashing out was punching walls, blowing the Bakugo's shit up, throwing breakable objects just to hear them shatter and take his anger out physically. Now, it wasn't only shouting, but he was actually shouting why he was angry, and that was something new. Katsuki Bakugo, I've told you several times to change the laundry. Don't make me do it again. Katsuki stood up harshly from his desk in his room, and Mitsuki watched him from the doorway, Matsuri peering over her shoulder. Would you shut up, you old hag, for once? You've been frustrating me today because I'm trying to do my fucking homework and I'm already overwhelmed. Our stupid school year's almost done, and those teachers' extras throwing work at us. Katsuki paused and shoved a piece of paper in front of Mitsuki's face. To-do list, shakingly written on the top. See, I have a lot of fucking stuff to do, and you're making it difficult for me. Mitsuki was shocked. Had her child actually told her what was wrong instead of just ripping the door off its hinges? Katsuki ran a hand through his hair and exhaled impatiently. So Mitsuki just breathed out, Okay, Katz. I didn't realize how busy you were. Could you change the laundry after dinner then? Katsuki didn't respond, but she watched him turn around, pick up the pen, and scribble something down on his list without complaints, then sat back down. After dinner, when Mitsuki checked the laundry room, a fresh load was in the dryer, the wet clothes were pinned up, and dried clothes were folded. Mitsuki cracked open the door to see her boy sleeping quietly in his room, his arm wrapped aggressively around the pillow, pressed against his chest. Maybe things were getting better. Another prominent thing Mitsuki has noted was that Katsuki finally stopped talking about seeing Izuku. After the whole villain attack, twice a week, Katsuki would rush home spewing about seeing Izuku again, but of course, he was just under stress. After the fourth therapy session, Katsuki finally let it go and actually asked to have 2 sessions a week instead of 1. Of course, Mitsuki and Matsuri agreed. They knew it was urgent because their boy never asked for help. Even with improvement, things like this was never linear, and Mitsuki would know. It took a year for her to get off cigarettes, after all. They buried Inko last week. They couldn't put it off any longer. Katsuki had gotten angry, repeating over and over again in a harsh voice that they had to wait for Izuku to come home first, but they couldn't since no one knew where he was. Katsuki finally accepted defeat, and he attended the service in silence. Mitsuki remembered being grateful it didn't rain. She also was hoping that Izuku would show up, but even luck couldn't bring them something that great. It was small, but peaceful. Inka would have liked it, if only her son would have been there safe and sound. Everything went well, as the funeral can go, until Katsuki started crying mutely. When Katsuki started crying, Matsuri started crying, which caused Mitsuki to cry, like some sort of chain reaction. Mitsuki can't remember the last time he saw Katsuki cry like that. Large tears rolling down his pink cheeks from his bloodshot eyes. He looked so much older than he did a few months ago. The guests cleared out, and it just left the Bakugos, Mitsuki, and Matsuri, both saying something brief to the stone carving grave that simply read, Inko Midoriya, loving mother and dear friend. When they were finished, Mitsuki asked Katsuki if he was ready to leave. He said no. He asked them to wait a further while away, and they did, walking a few rows down, taking a seat on the old black bench, simply dwelled in their thoughts. The only sound Mitsuki could hear was the murmuring coming out from her boy, who was sitting cross-legged at the end of the grave. Katsuki gently twisted some grass blades between his fingers, as an anxious movement, but his words were lost to the wind. Mitsuki still wondered what he said within those 2 hours, but neither her nor Matsuri dared to interrupt him. When they got home, something in Katsuki snapped, and he blew their kitchen table in half. Then punched a hole through the wall. He threw one plate and swore loudly as he marched to his room, changing out of his suit and taking off out of the front door in his workout clothes and earbuds. Mitsuki decided not to shout at him, instead cleaned with the soft tune of her husband humming. She didn't mind this, because Katsuki was doing his best, and healing wasn't linear. Now Mitsuki turned the car engine off and removed the keys, leaning against the headrest to shut her eyes for a brief moment. Matsuri was kind enough to work late today, so she could head home for a bath. So in return, she would make dinner tonight. Mitsuki ran a hand through her spikes and grabbed her briefcase, climbing out of the car and dusting off her navy pants with yet another sigh. Kats, I'm home, she called gently as she stepped into her home, shutting the door gently behind her as she kicked off her shoes, towing them carefully into the proper position. Kats? Mitsuki called out again, heading towards the kitchen. She received a grunt in return from the living room, the sound of something being hit gently over and over again, finally reaching her ears. Peering around the corner, Mitsuki caught the sight of Katsuki standing on top of a ladder, wearing a pink headband to keep his hair from his eyes, sporting a focused expression on his face. He leaned on the edge of the fireplace, and Mitsuki tried to see what was going on, but his body was blocking the task. What you doing, Kats? The hammer paused, and Katsuki didn't turn around. Nothing. Mitsuki didn't want to push, not when Katsuki's tone was clearly a warning. Mitsuki hummed and opted to make some tea for herself and Katsuki instead, boiling some water in the kitchen and scrolling through her phone at the kitchen table. 5 minutes later, a chair scraped against the wooden floor, and Katsuki flopped down, setting his chin on his folded arms as he watched his mom prepare tea. Here you are, Mitsuki said softly as she placed the warm mug of tea in front of him. His red eyes scanned the drink as he inhaled deeply. Green? You betcha. Katsuki nodded his head, and the two fell into a comfortable silence, neither feeling the need to fill it. The blond boy finished the last of his drink and slid the mug to the sink. I'm going on a run. All right, don't be too long. The door shut quietly, and Mitsuki stood, cracking her back several times as she grabbed some paperwork to fill out and heading to the living room. She fell back onto the couch and rested her socked feet on the coffee table, looking above the fireplace and causing her pen to slip from her fingers. There hung above was a framed photo of Matsuri, Mitsuki, and Inko with little Katsuki and Izuku. They couldn't have been much older than 3, both wearing their matching All Might onesies. The memory came to Mitsuki immediately. They had all gone for a picnic and celebrating Izuku's birthday, because apparently the kid only wanted to hang out with his mom, papa, auntie, uncle, and Hikachan. The picture was enlarged in a simple black frame, and tears came to Mitsuki's eyes. She didn't even know Katsuki kept that picture. Izuku painted on the floor for a moment, trying to remember where he was. He rolled onto his back, looking through the dark apartment, staring at the blood smear on the window. Right, his blood. Izuku took a deep breath to clear his mind, because if he was unable to do that, things weren't going to end well in his favor. With several moments of struggling, Izuku was able to clamber onto his feet and grab onto the back of the gray couch for dear life, doing everything in his power to ignore the bile racing in his throat. He clicked the back of his mouth guard and slipped it from where it hung around his neck, clattering to the floor in a pile of his own blood. Izuku slid off his elbow pads and unclipped the backpack straps from his shoulder, then unzipped the shirt and peeling it off. His boots were more of a problem as several minutes passed by until finally able to slip out of them. Followed by his fishnet socks. His utility strap fell with a loud clunk, and Izuku ended up removing his shorts, now standing nearly stark naked save for his boxers. This was humiliating. Thank God no one was home, and a meow caught him off guard. Izuku blinked down to the white kitten on the kitchen counter, their tail wagging back and forth curiously. Don't tell me, Izuku slurred while pouting to the kitten. I'm fine. I don't need help. Izuku completely forgot about his blood-soaked uniform and disappeared down the dark hallway, locating the bathroom and turning on the light, flinching at the brightness. He avoided looking in the mirror and instead crouched down to the cabinets underneath the sink. Helping himself to a large red bag he spotted, Izuku washed his hands and sat down on the closed toilet seat, digging through the bag to see what he can scrap together. He found a sanitized rag and applied pressure to the wound on his face, using his free hand to continue looking. Izuku was able to locate some medical needles and a thread, but one look at the wound on his abdomen, he nearly vomited the rest of his insides. So the option was thrown out the window real quick. He settled on some thick gauze and slapped it on his wound with a little more force than necessary, biting down on his tongue to keep himself from shouting out. Izuku applied a horrible tape job to keep the gauze over the wound and leaned over towards the bathtub tap, turning the knob and pulling the tab until the water came out from the shower nozzle instead. He rather not bathed in blood. Thank you very much. Izuku stepped to the tub with shaky legs, and he didn't even muster enough strength to shudder under the cold water, so he instead stood there without complaints until the water warmed itself up. It's fine, Izuku mumbled as he watched his own blood swirl around the drain. Everything is fine. Yeah, everything is fine. It wasn't fine, because minutes later, Izuku found himself sitting down under the stream of water with his knees pulled to his chest, the blood still flowing down the drain. Good thing the water was hitting his face, because he might have thought that he was crying. But he wasn't crying, because only a useless Deku would cry. Yet Izuku did cry. He cried until there was no tears left, because he knew that what he was, and that all he'll ever be. A stupid, useless crybaby Deku. Shota had a long night. Well, technically morning. And he stopped by Hisashi's radio station, which only made said night longer, as he spoke much too loud for 3 in the morning, his arms flapping in excitement while he recounted a story. Shota sulked up the stairs, and Hisashi skipped after him, only pausing when he let out a yawn, stretching his lanky arms above his head and cracking his back. I'm sleepy, the blonde whined as a child. I'm sleepy. The blonde whined like a child as Shota fiddled with his keys, struggling to get it in the doorknob. Maybe you should stop taking night shifts then, he responded quietly, pushing the door open while looking back at his husband. You're one to talk. Hisashi pointed a finger at Shota's nose and strut past dramatically, flipping his hair over his shoulders. Shota snorted and followed in, turning back around and relocking the door again. Hey, Zachi, he mumbled while shoving a key passed into his pocket. But he received no response. Did Hisashi fall asleep standing up again? Hisashi? Shota repeated a little bit louder. The man in question froze in place, staring at the kitchen counter. The kitchen counter was currently littered with bloody paw prints. The blood-stained white kitten standing there with a guilty demeanor. Shota stepped in front of Hisashi and activated his quirk, gripping onto his capture weapon and prepared for fight. There, Hisashi whispered and pointed to the window. The glass pane smeared in blood along the pile of clothes, the color difficult to make out because the red liquid was drenched in it. There was another bloody handprint on the back of the couch, and a thick puddle below, the trail disappearing down the hall towards the bedroom and bathroom. It was for the first time Shota noticed the loud sound of water. How did he not notice that before? Someone's in the shower, he murmured. As if on cue, the stream abruptly cut off. Maybe it's Namuri. Hisashi tried, but Shota shook his head. She doesn't do night patrols. Besides, she's smart enough to go to an actual hospital, judging by all this blood. The bathroom door creaked open and allowed the smallest source of light to mist over the darkness of the alley, some steam blowing out as well. Shota and Hisashi shared a quick glance, then both got into fighting positions as the sound of the footsteps grew closer. The bathroom light was shut off and put the apartment back into darkness once again. A small figure with a towel around their waist approached, head hung low. Hisashi slammed the light switch on and the figure yelped, green eyes shooting up and glancing around the room in frantic motion, stopping on Shota's green. Chaos? The boy stood still, as if he thought he might disappear, if he were lucky, but of course that was impossible. A red rag, once presumably white, was pressed against the lower half of his face, and the blood-soaked bandage was poorly taped to his abdomen, his tiny legs shaking in exhaustion, maybe even fear. Wrong apartment? Chaos shuffled. Should Shota even see him as Chaos anymore? This was clearly not the right time. What the hell happened, Midoriya? Whoops, that slipped out. The boy flinched at the name and trembled. The boy flinched at the name, and the trembling of his hands increased, but he refused to confirm or deny his identity. Borrowed your shower, he spoke in a quiet, monotone voice, his eyes crossing as he watched some blood drip down the tip of his nose. Hisashi squeaked, "You're bleeding!" Chaos, Midoriya. The kid blinked. Yeah, no shit. Get the first aid kit, Hisashi. Shota took over in a calm tone, although that was not how he really felt. What happened? He repeated again as Sashi scrambled down the hall. The kid just shook his head and looked away, Shota noticing how red his eyes were. Kid, I need you to answer. What happened? How badly are you injured? If we need a hospital, no hospital. He shouted with a pinched, angry expression. No fucking hospital, understand? Shota knew mood swings like this couldn't be healthy, yet Chaos always did this. His emotions were a wild card. Understood. Hitoshi hesitated because he knew if a hospital was necessary, he would wrangle the kid there himself. Hazashi returned and pulled a chair from the kitchen table, patting on it with a pleading look for the kid. The pleading look towards the kid. Shota sighed and crouched down. Please, tell me what happened. I want to help you, but I can't do that if you won't tell me. The kid was silent for another moment, and by the time Shota noticed the wobbling of his bottom lip, it was too late. I'm so tired, he sobbed as fat tears rolled down his cheeks. Shota guided him to the chair, and the greenette sunk into it, biting his lips as he choked his sob down. What happened to the kid to make him think he couldn't cry? Hizashi took over and smiled gently. Hi, I need you to be honest with me, okay? What's your real name, hon? The kid's eyes went wide, and his breath quickened, almost as if he were choking, or someone was cutting off his air supply. Shota was preparing for a full-blown panic attack, but Micah trotted over and brushed against the kid's leg. His fear eyes snapped towards the kitten. He sucked in a sharp breath and adjusted his hold on the rag. Are you going to give me to the police? Shota looked away and ran a hand through his hair, leaning over, and was surprised when the kid let him pat his matted curls. Midoriya? The greenette sniffled again and looked away. Izuku, no Midoriya. No Midoriya, then. Shota repeated gently, but that was something they could unpack later. In fact, there was a lot to unpack here. After helping Izuku into a clean pair of boxers borrowed from Hazashi's closet, the blonde carefully assessed his 2 wounds with a grimace. I need to stitch up the stab wound. Hazashi hummed. It's not very deep, and your organs don't appear to be damaged, but the flesh wound is pretty big. Izuku nodded numbly in understanding and let the hero get to work, keeping his eyes in one place as he didn't flinch. He didn't even flinch as Hazashi poured the alcohol to rinse the wound, nor did he flinch when he began stitching the skin up without any numbing spray. The slash across his face was a little more complicated, because Hazashi was able to stop the bleeding and let the blood cut. It ran straight over the bridge of his nose, ending beneath his eyes. Shota didn't want to think about what could have happened if it was just an inch higher. Hazashi worked his medical magic, and Shota collected some clothes for the kid, once again helping him get dressed and watching the plain pale scars over Izuku's pale skin. Burns, slashes, stabs, and cuts, all shapes and sizes. There was one burn mark that ran from his lower thigh all the way up to his armpit, getting around his torso and back. Shota couldn't help but wonder where they all came from. He hadn't been in the vigilante game long enough for this. In fact, Shota couldn't name anyone else he knew that was scarred like this, and he knew a lot of pro heroes. Where are you staying? Shota broke the silence while finally getting through the last knot of Izuku's hair, the boy watching him with analyzing eyes. With a friend. Well, Chaos did say he had 2 friends, so Izuku must mean them. Hazashi typed something on his phone and leaned over Shota's shoulder, allowing him to read the note. Tiny little thing. Shota mumbled in agreement. You're not 12, are you? 15. Shota needed a regroup because Izuku did not look 15. He barely looked 12. Right. Anyways, with friends, so you tell me you're safe? Yes. At this point, Izuku was obviously adept to lying that even Shota couldn't pick out the truth from his lies. Do you eat enough? Yes. Oh, alright. Shota had a pair of eyes. No, you don't. Look, I need you to make sure that you're alive often. Okay? So I want you here for dinner every day at 7. Hazashi's a good cook. I promise. And you don't have to eat with us, but I want you to stop by to get a good meal every day, Shota said sternly. After a moment of more analyzing, Izuku finally given a small nod and tugged on the hem of his borrowed shirt. Why aren't you calling the police? He spoke in a soft tone. Shota grew up without a loving family. His parents would come once a month if he was lucky. Hazashi was tossed into foster care straight from the hospital and was stuck there until he was 7. It wasn't the best place. Besides, Izuku probably had enough trust issues. Because I do what I want. It definitely wasn't because he cares, because he doesn't. Hazashi did what Hazashi does best and shoved the delicious meal down Izuku's throat and tucked him on the couch, staying with him until the kid fell asleep. Yet even then, Izuku was gone the next day, along with his uniform, and the blood was cleaned. Hazashi sat blankly at the kitchen table, and Shota downed his 4th cup of coffee that morning until he paused, slowly setting his mug down. How did he know where we lived? Okay, this was awesome. I loved it. I love it. I'm getting a little bit of Dadzawa in it, and it's just like, yes, like protective Mike. Like, I love all of this. I love it. And also now Izuku will get meals every single day, because at least having one meal is better than nothing. Even if you have an eating disorder and stuff, but he doesn't have that problem. He just doesn't have the ability to get food very often. But yeah, one meal a day will get him to look not so sickly. But I am so stoked. He's gonna get food on a regular basis. Yes. So, if you want to see more of this, you know what to do.